وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وخليله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وكشف الغمة وتركها على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك. فاللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته واهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد, to proceed. Certainly, many of us feel that we are going through great hardships, and many of us feel down and depressed because of the condition of the Ummah, because a particular segment of the Ummah is going through a great ordeal at this time, and we're not only able to help, but we're also, of course, we should help within our capacity as much as we can, but we feel that we are sort of an aggrieved minority, that even expression of thought, we're denied the privilege or the right to even express our thoughts. Some of our brothers and sisters, if you heard about what was happening at Harvard University, and some of the students there at Harvard University, they have been blacklisted by certain organizations that want to ensure that they don't get hired after graduation, and that they basically, whenever they seek an employment somewhere, that they would be after them to ensure that they don't get hired, or that if they get hired, that they get subsequently fired or something of that nature. So it's things may basically seem very gloomy and depressing, but what I came to talk to you about today is that they should not be gloomy and depressing whatsoever, and they should not basically affect your good thoughts of Allah and your trust in Allah and your joy in serving the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the results are not up to us, and the results don't matter. Your service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and service of the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what will eventually matter. So what makes a believer invincible? You know, the psyche of the believer, what makes it invincible? It is basically devotion to Allah and clarity of purpose. You have devotion to Allah, and you know that your Lord is in control of everything, and nothing happens within His dominion that's beyond His control. You're certain of this, you're confident, you're certain of this, and you're devoted to the one who is in control, the omnipotent, the omniscient, the omnibenevolent. You are, your devotion is to your Lord, Al-Alim, Al-Qadir, Al-Wadud, Al-Rahim. That's your Lord. How could this be your Lord, and then you lose hope, you despair, you get frustrated? Do you really know who your Lord is? Are you really certain that He is your Lord? Are you really certain that you worship the one who created the heavens and the earth, who's in full control of the destinies of all people, who's in full control of, the planets and the constellations and the universes, if there is more than one? If you're certain of this, then there is no room for despair. Someone may say, the Prophet ﷺ كان متواصل الأحزان, that he was often grieving. And someone may say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. You're about to destroy yourself out of grief that they are not accepting faith. Or فلعلك باقع نفسك in سورة الكهف لعلك باقع نفسك ألا يكونوا مؤمنين in سورة الشعراء فلعلك باقع نفسك على آثارهم إن لم يؤمنوا بهذا الحديث أسفا in سورة الكهف. So someone may say, no, you're not sharing the whole truth. There is room for sadness, there is room for grief, and there is room also for despair sometimes. حتى إذا استيأس الرسل وظنوا أنهم كذبوا جاءهم نصرنا فنجي من نشاء ولا يرد بأسنا عن القوم المجرمين. So حتى إذا استيأس الرسل وظنوا أنهم قد كذبوا جاءهم نصرنا فنجي من نشاء ولا يرد بأسنا عن القوم المجرمين. Until the messengers despaired, and they felt, or they thought that they were denied victory. Our victory came to them, and those who were meant to survive survived. Those who we meant to make survive survived, and our punishment will not be averted from those who are criminal or those who are oppressors. So, in other words, the ayat do talk about grief, the ayat do talk about frustration, the ayat do talk about despair sometimes on the part of the messengers and on the part of their followers. So how come we're talking about, endless hope and endless optimism? So it is not difficult. You could simultaneously have layers of emotions. As a human being, you're a very complex creature, and you could simultaneously have layers of emotions. What we are talking about when we say that there is no room for despair and no room for grief is the core, is the center, is basically what your heart is filled with deep inside, the trust in Allah and the reliance on Allah that fill your heart and give you immense hope, endless, infinite hope. So what are those three layers? You have an external layer of cheerfulness. I don't see that. You guys are not being cheerful. But the Prophet ﷺ was, and you can't claim to be more sort of important or busier or have greater challenges than the Prophet ﷺ. He had the greatest mission in the history of humanity. He basically was commissioned with relaying the final divine communication to mankind from his Lord. He encountered great difficulties and hardships. So the Prophet ﷺ had greater burdens than us. Despite that, Abdullah ibn al-Harith says, ما رأيت أحدا أكثر تبسما من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. I have never seen anyone who smiled more than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he basically had a radiant smile that would give anyone around him comfort, joy, happiness, confidence. His companions, it's just enough to sit with him and to look at his face, and you're filled with comfort and hope. So that is the outside layer. That's an indication of your emotional generosity. That's an indication that no matter how you may be feeling inside, you're sharing this smile with people to make them happy, to make them comfortable, and to bring joy to their hearts. That cheerfulness that the Prophet ﷺ had shared with his companions his family members. So try to do this. Like really, try to smile. It is possible in the hardest and harshest of times to smile to your wife and kids, so that it is not overwhelming, so that the feelings of sort of grief or sadness don't overwhelm those who are around you. Now, so that's the external layer, and you have to keep this, you have to keep that cheerfulness all the time, even when you have a personal hardship, like you get laid off from work, or you lose your business or something, and you come back home. You have to put that smile on. You have to basically wear that smile to give comfort to people. That is the utmost generosity. That's a lot more generous than being generous with your money. A lot more generous than being generous with your money. So that's the external layer, and then, Jazakumullah khair. That's the external layer, and then you have a second layer that basically, that is basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying to his prophet when he says to him, لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. You're about to destroy yourself out of grief that they are not accepting faith. فَلَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ إِن لَّمْ يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَذَا الْحَدِيثِ أَسَفًا. Similar meaning. That is what may be meant by the hadith of Abi Hala. It's in Shama'il al-Tirmidhi. Hadith of Abi Hala is in Shama'il al-Tirmidhi, and Shama'il al-Tirmidhi is an important book that we should all read. It's about the characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, all the characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the physical and moral characteristics of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even his tools and things he owned and stuff like that. So certainly because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is our most beloved, and you want to know more about him. Just people want to know more about the people they love. But in this book, there is this hadith of Abi Hala where he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ كان متواصل الأحزان, so he was off to grieving. Now, the authenticity of this hadith is controversial. The authenticity of this hadith is controversial.
8,000 Palestinians died. Thanks for going in there to bulldoze them, and we should smile.
So the authenticity of this hadith is controversial. However, the issue here is if we accept this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ was actually off to grieving, it has some backing in the Quran. The Quran does talk to us about the Prophet ﷺ destroying himself out of grief because he was not intoxicated. There is this station of intoxication, spiritual intoxication. It's not that type of intoxication. But people talk about spiritual intoxication versus wakefulness. So the Prophet ﷺ was not spiritually intoxicated. He was always aware. He was always conscious. He was always connected to the reality and responding to the reality appropriately. So this sort of like spiritual coma that some people may go into, where they just disconnect from the reality and then good and evil become equal to them, and they have no concern or consideration of the pain and suffering of others and so on. That's not what the Prophet ﷺ was like. So in the Battle of Badr, Abdullah ibn Abbas, it's reported by Muslim from Abdullah ibn Abbas that in the Battle of Badr, the Prophet ﷺ was praying to his Lord and he was raising his hands up to the point that they were able to see the white of his armpit, and his mantle fell off his shoulders. His mantle fell off his shoulders. And he was praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala بتضرع, with humility, and saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma أنجز ما وعدتني, اللهم آتني ما وعدتني, اللهم إن تهلك هذه العصابة من المسلمين لا تعبد بعد اليوم في الأرض. So the Prophet ﷺ was making this dua, and Abdullah ibn Abbas tells us why he was making this dua. He basically glanced at the army of the disbelievers, and they were about 1,000, and he looked at his army, and Abdullah ibn Abbas in this particular hadith says that they were 319, and then he was concerned. He was concerned about this group of believers. And then he was saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, accomplish what you have promised for me. Accomplish what you have promised me. Oh Allah, bring to me now what you have promised me. Oh Allah, if this band of Muslims is destroyed, you will not be worshipped on the face of earth after today. Because that was the only group of muwahideen who worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone on the face of earth. So that is how the Prophet ﷺ was pleading to his Lord. Did the Prophet ﷺ not know that he would be given victory? We were actually told that the Prophet ﷺ knew where each one of the chiefs of Quraysh will drop, knew that where each one of the chiefs of Quraysh will drop dead in the battlefield. And he would point to the places where they would drop, point to his companions and show them the places that they would drop in the battlefield. So why then was the Prophet ﷺ making dua like this, to the point that Abu Bakr feared for him, because he was making dua with such intensity that Abu Bakr was afraid for the Prophet ﷺ, for his health. And he kept on saying to him, enough, yakfika munashadatuka rabbak. So it is enough, Allah will accomplish for you what you have promised. And he embraced him from the back. He picked up his mantle, he put it on his shoulders, he embraced him from the back, and he kept on telling him, enough, because he was afraid for the Prophet ﷺ. Now, so here is the point. The point is that you have to be engaged with the reality. You have to respond appropriately to the reality, despite your confidence, despite your reliance, and despite your confidence, you have to engage appropriately with the reality. And you should not basically surround yourself in a bubble of spiritual intoxication, in a bubble of indifference caused by that spiritual intoxication. So when we say that you have infinite hope, you have infinite confidence in your Lord, infinite certainty in the power of your Lord and the benevolence of your Lord, that does not mean that you're not going to do your work from your place, from your corner. What can you do? How should you respond? As Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah said once, مَنْ لَمْ يَسُرَّهُ مَا يَسُرُّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَيَسُوءُهُ مَا يَسُوءُهُمْ فَلَيْسَ مِنْهُمْ. He who is not he who is not delighted by that which gives delight to the believers, and not saddened but by that which causes sadness to the believers, is not one of the believers. And as the Prophet ﷺ himself said, مثل المؤمنين في توادهم وتراحمهم وتعاطفهم كمثل الجسد الواحد إذا اشتكى منه عضو تداعى له سائر الجسد بالسهر والحمى. The likeness of the believers in their compassion for one another, their mercy for one another, توادهم وتراحمهم وتعاطفهم, empathy with one another is like one body. It's like one body. إذا اشتكى منه عضو, when one part of the body complains, the rest of the body feels for it. The rest of the body feels for it, suffers from insomnia. You can't have like pain in your foot and go to sleep because your foot is far away. You know, the whole body will suffer, will have insomnia because of the pain in your foot. It's like your hand and your eye. So when your hand is injured, the pain in your hand causes tears in your eyes, and when there are tears in your eyes, your hand wipes the tears from your eyes. So that's the second layer. So the first layer is that layer of cheerfulness that you will share with people to give them confidence, to give them strength, to give them comfort, people who are around you, people who look up to you. They do need to find that comfort in you, and you do need to find that strength in you. And then the second layer is the layer where you engage with the reality as it is, without being intoxicated, without being in a coma, without being in a bubble, to deal with the reality as it is and to engage the reality as it is, and do your best. Do your best to fulfill your potential in your devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is what will give you strength, and that is basically what will make you have this infinite source of power and hope, and will give you immense strength, is to understand that you are here in this world for a short while. No one knows when their term will end and their time will come to depart from this world. So no one knows. So you're here for a short while. All you need to do is to fulfill your potential. Fulfill your potential in devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, commitment to His deen, and will be having basically extending kindness and help and support to His creatures, to having goodwill for His creations. So that is your potential. So that's all you need to do. Therefore, you will never be defeated. The Prophet ﷺ said this: عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلَّهُ لَهُ خَيْرٌ إِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ سَرَّاء شَكَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ وإن أصابته ضراء صبر فكان خيرا له إن أمره كله له خير وليس ذلك لأحد إلا للمؤمن إن أصابته سراء شكر فكان خيرا له وإن أصابته ضراء صبر فكان خيرا له. How amazing is the affair of the believer if he's touched by ease and prosperity, he will show gratitude, and that would be good for him. And if he's touched by hardship and difficulty, he will show patience, and that will be good for him. And that affair, no one shares with the believer in that affair. Invincible, indestructible psyche. You're focused. You have a goal. You are here to fulfill your potential. So whatever it is that comes your way, you know how to deal with it. And you know how to deal with it in a way that will not slow you down, that will not impede your progress to your goal, which is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no matter what the terrain is like, you're moving at the same speed. You're moving at the same speed towards your goal, towards your ultimate purpose, which is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we are confronted by cases like this case, then what do we do? Then we have to map out we have to map out the potential room that we can move in, or potential space. We have to map out our bounds, our limits, because you also do not want to cause yourself harm that is basically not outweighed by an overarching benefit. There is no purpose to basically vent out and cause yourself harm without bringing about any benefit. Because how helpful is that? How could that be beneficial? Beneficial to whom? To nobody. So we have to map out the space that we can move in, and we have to do our best within this space so that Allah does not see that we have fallen short. And that's the problem. Many people who basically want to be loud, they don't actually do the most that they can do within the space, within that safe space that they have. So when I say that you don't cause yourself harm, that does not mean cowardice. It means that, like, if there is an envelope to push, you push the envelope, but you push the envelope also without being reckless. You have to know how to do it and how to do it tactfully, and to basically do everything that you can do. So no one basically is deprived of all means to help and assist. Everybody can help and assist in some way. So dua, anybody here can't make dua? But are you making enough dua? That's a question. Are you making enough dua? Do you remember to make enough dua? Do you facilitate the basically ascension of your dua and acceptance of your dua by praying more, fasting more, giving more sadaqah? Didn't Allah say, وَالْعَمَلُ الصَّالِحُ يَرْفَعُ, that the good deeds will raise your dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So are you doing this? Are you basically introspecting? Aren't the balaya that befall the ummah in part are because of the shortcomings, our shortcomings? Are you making sure that you're doing your best so that you're not contributing to any problem, to the balaya that befall the ummah and the masa'ib that befall the ummah? And then are you making sure that when you're raising your dua, you're doing the good deeds? You are in a position to have your dua accepted. Because the issue here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept the dua, but as the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith reported by Al-Hakim authentically, ادعوا الله وأنتم موقنون بالإجابة واعلموا أن الله لا يقبل دعاء من قلب غافل لاهٍ. So make dua to Allah or invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with certainty in His response. But beware that Allah does not accept the dua or the supplication of a heart that is heedless and diverted by vanity. Heedless and diverted by vanity. Are these our hearts? Are our hearts heedless and diverted by vanity? Or our hearts are connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time? And the dua that rises from them will have the doors of the heavens open to it, and will have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala respond to it. So this is important. This is truly, truly important, because at the end of the day, the ummah is the collective, and you're part of this collective. just make sure that you are doing your best to be a good sort of to be a good guard at this outpost, which is you. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be a good person to be a good ingredient, addition to the collective, to the ummah in general. And then you make dua as much as you can. And then most of the time we're also able to assist with something else. There are legitimate organizations, legal, legitimate, reputable organizations that are collecting money. They assist, supplies have started to reach Gaza already. A few days ago, they started to trickle in, but at some point, there will need to be those organizations that are working there and those organizations that will work there will need to have a lot to be able to help and assist 2.2 million people utterly devastated by sort of barbaric bombardment for weeks, and Allah knows for how long it will last. So to contribute to those organizations is important also. Then you will have, there is basically the battle of the hearts and minds. So you're not going to be able to participate in the battlefield, but there is another, I'm not saying it's a bigger battle, it's not a bigger battle, but there is another battle. That's the battle for the hearts and minds of the global public opinion, which does matter. So have you tried to do your best in bringing awareness, raising awareness about the plight of the Palestinians, about the 75 years of ethnic cleansing, occupation, annexation of land, eviction from homes, destruction of properties and livelihood, extrajudicial killing, like a true apartheid state, and so on and so on. Are you trying to bring awareness? Do you have some numbers? Do you have some stats to share with people? Have some solid information? Do you have some references? And if not, why didn't you do your homework? Why didn't you spend like a couple of hours studying so that you could sound convincing and not just simply emotional? So that's an effort that everybody, most of us can do. Most of us are intelligent enough to do some of this, at least some of this. So all of these things are things that we can do so that we are using all the space that we can use and not falling short in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, that grief that we have, that sadness that we have, is the middle layer. You're covering this with an external layer of cheerfulness that you're sharing with people to keep them afloat and to keep them confident and comfortable. But the core layer is a layer of immense happiness and joy. Immense happiness and joy. We were promised to this. من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة. Whoever does righteousness, whether a male or a female, while in a state of belief, we shall give them a good life. You should be having a good life. Your life should be a good life. And that's, قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِّمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. Say, in Allah's mercy and in His bounty, let them rejoice. يَفْرَحُوا, let them rejoice. هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِّمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. It's better than everything they collect. So the core, if you want to give a title to the core when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ, the title of the core is لا تحزن إن الله معنا. That's it. That's the title for the core. So if you want to describe the first layer, ما رأيت أحدا كان أكثر تبسما من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. The second layer كان متواصل الأحزان. But Imam Ibn Taymiyyah said that this does not mean that he was off to grieving for personal aspirations or aversions. No, he was deeply reflective and deeply concerned. That's how you should translate متواصل الأحزان. Not off to grieving, deeply reflective, deeply concerned about his ummah. Because Allah said, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا, and don't be weak or powerless and don't grieve. So anyway, so متواصل الأحزان is basically the title of the second layer. لا تحزن إن الله معنا is the title of the third layer. لا تحزن, do not grieve. إن الله معنا, Allah is with us. And that's it. If you truly know إن الله معنا, if you truly know what that means, as the Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Bakr, يا أبا بكر ما ظنك باثنين الله ثالثهما. O Abu Bakr, what do you think of two people, or the condition of two people, when their third is none but Allah? Their third is Allah. Ya Abu Bakr, what do you think about two people when their third is none but Allah? Allahu thalithuhuma. So that should be the infinite source of strength that we should always tap into, that we should always rely on to keep us going and to keep us focused on our purpose, our goal, to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing that which is right, by responding to every event with the right response. And if this means concern, and if this means worry and concern, then it should be. The Prophet ﷺ was worried and concerned about his companions in Badr, as we said. And if this, means joy, as when they won the battle, then it should be. But whether it is this or that, it never means stopping. It never slows down the believer, because the believer knows his target and has completely clarity of purpose and complete determination to fulfill his potential, whatever the circumstances are. So use all the techniques that try to bring this optimism into your life and the life of the people around you, and use the techniques that the Prophet ﷺ used. One of the great techniques of the Prophet ﷺ is hope in the future, to have hope in the future. The source of all of this optimism is in Allah ma'ana, Allah is with us. That's the source of all of but the Prophet ﷺ used also techniques. He, for instance, would say, لا عدوى ولا طيرة وأحب الفأل الحسن, or no superstitious omens and no transmission of disease by contagion or by infection, except with the permission of Allah. Much needs to be said about this, but don't focus on this now. But he said, I like good omens. And he said, they asked him, what's a good omen? He said, al-kalima at-tayyiba, a good word is a good omen. And he used to do reframing. So when someone dies, simply reframe it. استشهد. That sort of spontaneous reframing changes the whole perspective. They say سقط شهيدا صعد شهيدا. You know, he dropped dead, or he dropped a martyr, he ascended a martyr, and so on. So reframing, the Prophet ﷺ used to do this reframing a lot. For instance, the wife of Abu Jahl used to say, مذمم أبينا ودينه قلينا وأمره عصينا. So the praiseworthy, the Prophet ﷺ is Muhammad ﷺ, the praiseworthy. So she used to say مذمم, the praiseworthy. أبينا, we have rejected. ودينه قلينا, his religion we've despised. وأمره عصينا, and his command we have declined or denied. So the Prophet ﷺ would say to his companions, don't you see how Allah averts the abuse of Quraysh from me? They are cursing Muzammam, and I am Muhammad. So that's reframing. That's just like immediate reframing. He's seeing the bounty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this. They are cursing him in his face, and he sees the bounty of Allah that they are using Muzammam, but it doesn't touch him. He's not Muzammam, he's Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was passing by in the market, someone told him, are you a donkey? And Umar said to him, no, and he walked on. So you can have that, you have to have that resilience to be productive, to be effective, because we don't need people who are desperate. We don't need people who are just upset and sad and weeping. Although sometimes you just can't fight it. But it should never slow you down. It should never stop you from doing what you need to do, because it's not going to help anyone. You know, your grief is not going to help anyone unless you're using this grief to motivate yourself. There is like a level of grief. It's the worry, it's the concern that is motivating. If it is not, if your grief is overwhelming, not motivating, then it is the forbidden grief. It's the haram grief. It is the grief that is mentioned in لا تهنوا ولا تحزنوا. Don't be powerless and don't grieve. That's it. What about you? أستغفر الله لي ولكم. Yes.
Describe to us the year of sadness for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when there was blockade against him and his people. And Sayyidatuna Khadija died at that year too, and it was called the year of sadness of grief. How did he act during this year for us to learn from it on day-to-day basis?
What he was, he continued to basically preach. He continued his work. He continued his ministry without any stopping, without slowing down. And in that year, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the prize of Al-Isra wal-Mi'raj to comfort him And that was a major source of comfort for the Prophet ﷺ and for the believing community, even though, Quraysh denied that he ascended to the heavens, and he proved it to them by describing Jerusalem and so on. But it was a great source of comfort for the Prophet ﷺ, and it was the beginning of, came right after this, the bay'ah, the Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Ula, the bay'ah where he received the pledge from the Ansar of Medina, and then came Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Thaniya, and then came the immigration. So it marked the end of the grief. The beginning of the rising of the sun of Islam.
So let's hope this also will be the right.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Sisters, any questions? جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك.